The cold night air bit into my skin as I woke up to the sound of branches cracking under my boots. "Ryan?" I called out, my voice echoing through the dark woods. No answer. The campfire had died out, and all I could see were the faint tire marks where our truck had been parked. My heart started pounding. He wouldn't. He couldn't have left me here. Then I saw it. His note, scribbled on a torn napkin, stuck under a half-empty bottle of water. "Meet Grizzly Bear, Dad. Good luck." For a second, I froze. Then anger crawled up my spine like wildfire. The forest was alive with sounds, howls, rustling leaves, the eerie cry of some distant animal. I was 60 years old, and my own son had dumped me here to die. All because I refused to give him what he wanted. I clenched my fists, the note crumpling in my hand. That night, I swore one thing. If I made it out of that forest alive, Ryan would beg me for forgiveness. And I'd watch him crumble. Life wasn't always cruel to me. There was a time when my small world was full of laughter, warmth, and the sound of my son's tiny footsteps running through the house. After my wife Claire passed away when Ryan was just 8, the silence in our home became unbearable. The walls seemed to echo her voice at night, and every corner carried a memory I couldn't escape. But I didn't break. I couldn't. I had a son who needed me, and I swore I'd be both his father and mother. I worked at the lumber mill back then. Long shifts, dangerous work, barely enough pay. My hands stayed blistered. My back ached every evening. But when I came home and saw Ryan's face light up with, "Dad, you're home," that pain melted away. I remember cooking burnt pancakes on Sundays because that's all I could manage without Claire's touch. Ryan would laugh, drown them in syrup, and say, "These are perfect, Dad." God, I lived for moments like that. When he got sick once, I stayed by his hospital bed for 3 nights straight, pretending to be strong while my heart broke. When he needed new shoes, I wore my old ones with holes in the soles. I skipped meals so he could eat properly. I sold my tools to buy him a laptop for school. Every sacrifice felt small compared to seeing him smile. I taught him to fish, to build a fire, to be a good man. I thought I had done right by him. Even when life knocked me down, when the mill closed, when debts piled up, I never let Ryan see me defeated. I took small handyman jobs around town, fixed fences, painted porches, mowed lawns, anything to keep the lights on and food on the table. The house we lived in, our family home, was more than just wood and nails. Claire and I built it with our own hands. Each plank, each wall, held a piece of our story. I wanted Ryan to have it someday, not because it was valuable, but because it was ours. I imagined him raising his children there, the sound of laughter returning to those quiet halls. But as he grew older, things changed. The boy who used to run into my arms after school started spending more time on his phone than with me. When he went off to college, I cried in secret for days, not out of sadness, but pride. My boy was finally chasing dreams bigger than mine. I sent him money whenever he needed it, even if it meant I had to skip my own medication. He'd always say, "Thanks, Dad. I'll pay you back someday." But that day never came. When he got married, I gifted him the last piece of Claire's jewelry, her locket, so he could give it to his wife. "Something to remind you of where you come from," I said. He smiled, but his eyes didn't hold the same warmth they used to. After that, the calls grew shorter. The visits became rare. He said he was busy, that city life was demanding. I believed him. I always believed him. So when he suddenly suggested we go camping, "Just you and me, Dad, like old times," my heart swelled. I thought maybe he finally missed me. I packed my old camping gear, even bought new boots. I told everyone in town, "My son's taking me camping this weekend." Proud like a fool. Little did I know, that trip wasn't about bonding. It was about ending me. It started like any other reconnect trip, just the two of us, a cooler, and a promise he'd made over coffee. We'll do this like old times, Dad. We drove until the map on his phone blinked off the grid, and he smiled like a boy showing off a hideout. From the first hour I noticed the gap, the way his eyes skimmed past me to his screen, the way his laugh had lost its warmth. At dusk, while I set the fire and unwrapped the sandwiches, he leaned back and said, casual as a shrug, "Dad, you know that house is a burden. Transfer it to me. Come live with us." I laughed, not because it was funny, but because I didn't want to imagine the words as anything but a joke. "You know the house is your mother's and mine," I said. "It's not something you just take." He tapped his finger on the truck bed with impatience. "This isn't sentimental. It's practical. You're old, Dad. You can't handle it alone." "Old?" I scoffed. "I raised you alone. I paid for your education. You think I don't know that?" he snapped. "But I have bills. I have a family to start. I can't be waiting around for you to die to get what's mine." His words landed like stones. For a moment I only stared at him, the flames throwing his face into hard angles I hadn't seen before. "Is that what you think of me?" I whispered. My voice sounded foreign to my own ears. He shrugged, not thinking, saying, "It's just business, Dad." Business. The word cut deeper than any insult. It made my sacrifices into ledger lines, my years into columns to be balanced. When I asked him to stay, "Please, just stay, talk to me," he laughed, short and bitter. "You're being sentimental. The world doesn't run on sentiment." I remember the way he stood, the back of his hand brushing his jacket, the casualness of a man who had decided something crucial and final. "Hey, I'm going to the truck," he said, already moving away. "I'll grab water." I watched him walk. He paused at the tailgate, looked back over his shoulder, no guilt in his face, just the impatience of someone who wants the final act done. "Be right back," he called. When he didn't return after a long minute, I called his name. "Ryan?" My voice carried strange across the trees. No answer. I walked to the clearing where we'd parked. The empty tire track sat like a bruise in the dirt. The truck was gone. At first I laughed, a nervous, thin sound. Maybe he'd walked the trail. Maybe he'd left to prank me. I told myself any lie that kept the truth from cracking open. Then I found the napkin, crumpled, shoved under a stone. The handwriting was his, careless and cruel. "Meet Grizzly Bear, Dad. Good luck." My stomach dropped in a way I'd oddly felt once before, the night his mother died. For a second, there was no air. I read the words again and again, as if repetition could remold them into something else, an accident, a dreadful joke, a misread note. I called him, straight to voicemail. I texted, "What is this?" His reply came 2 minutes later. "You'll understand." No apology, no turning back, just a smug half-sentence that felt like salt in an open wound. Shock was the first tide. I remember the trembling in my hands, how the napkin blurred into an unreadable smear when I held it too close. Sadness followed fast and cruel. An old footage reel of every night I'd stayed up with him sick, every shift I'd taken so he could have more. Every time I'd swallowed pride to give him a present, I felt the past like a physical ache behind my ribs. The birthdays I'd worked through, the winters I'd spent patching holes in our roof, the evenings I'd sat alone on the porch listening to his laughter fade at the sound of a closing car door. Disbelief lingered. He can't do this, I thought. Not my son. Not the boy who once cried when I heard him. I called neighbors. They shrugged, helpless. I walked the trail until the sun set, and shadows grew teethy, shouting his name until my throat burned. When the town phone finally rang that night, and they told me there'd been a few sightings of a truck, my heart jumped, then thudded as the ranger's voice said calmly, "No sign of your son. The area's clear." Anger arrived last, slow and hot, like a coal pressed under the tongue. It started in my jaw, spread to my hands, and settled behind my eyes. I remembered every time he'd rolled his eyes at my stories, every time he'd called me old-fashioned in front of friends, every time he'd assumed my silence meant consent. "How could you?" I whispered to the trees. and the forest offered no answer but wind. The betrayal felt obscene. More too. Abandonment, deliberate, premeditated humiliation. He had left me, left us, the house, the life we built, to a fate he'd chosen with a smirk. He had reduced me to a punchline written on a napkin. I thought of the nights I'd sat up with him, the pennies I'd counted to make his dreams possible, the cold I'd walked through to keep a flame for him. That image of him at the truck, turning the key, looking back with nothing in his eyes, kept replaying, each loop sharpening the edge of my fury. I felt small and then monstrous in the same breath. Small because of the helplessness of being abandoned. Monstrous because my mind began, unbidden, to imagine how I'd answer such cruelty. Humiliation washed over me with people I hadn't even met. What would the neighbors say? What would his friends think when they learned he abandoned his father? I thought of calling the police, but the idea of walking into the station and saying, "My son left me to die," felt like opening a wound wider. Instead, I sat on that cold stone floor, the napkin clutched in my fist, the fire long dead, and let the betrayal settle like a new bone in my chest. By the time the moon pushed through the trees, my shock had curdled into something dangerous. I could feel it, an ember of resolve under the ash of hurt, and it warmed me in a way the campfire never would. It was the cold that finally pushed me over the edge, not just the bite of the night air, but the way it seeped into my bones and stole the patience I'd been hoarding like a ration. I had spent 2 nights under that ragged tarp, stomach clawing with hunger, throat raw from calling a name that never came. On the second morning, my hands were numb and my knees shook when I tried to stand. I felt smaller than the trash bags I used to tie empty, like my life had been folded up and left behind. Grief was easy in those first hours, an old companion that settled over me familiar and heavy. I let it wash through, let the memory of Claire and Ryan's childhood lullaby me into tears. But grief does not keep you alive. It only explains why you hurt. Determination is what gets you out of the mud. I remember the exact moment the switch flipped. I was crouched by a shallow stream, cupping water into my mouth, when I saw my reflection, gaunt, wild-eyed, a man I barely recognized. My reflection had the face of the man who taught his son to tie a knot, the man who taught him to stand on his own 2 feet. That old man wasn't supposed to be left like yesterday's news. Enough, I mouthed to the river, and the sound of the word on my lips surprised me with its firmness. It did not come from bewilderment or pleading. It came like a command from somewhere deeper. My mind replayed the napkin, the casual cruelty of his words, how he had erased a lifetime of care with a single smug line. Each memory became a small, hot coal I couldn't ignore. I thought of the nights I'd spent keeping the house warm, the winters I'd gone without so he could have new shoes, how I'd carried him on my shoulders when he fell. None of that made him hesitating in the truck. None of that made him stay. Anger rose, not as a shout, but as a sharpening. It threaded itself through my grief until sorrow was an edge I could use. I would not allow myself to be a ghost that faded without leaving a mark. The decision was not sudden theater. It was a quiet accumulation, each humiliation, each cold night, piling up until it made a foundation for something else. Action. I stood up and felt every ache as a warning and a promise. I could feel the old discipline returning, years of waking before dawn, of doing the hard thing because it needed doing. Survival instincts that had been folded under decades of gentleness snapped back into place. I will not die on his timetable, I thought. The words felt like a plank to step on. I began to plan with the narrow, efficient mind of a man who had worked with his hands his whole life. The grief opened like a map, and I read it carefully, where I had been wrong and where I had been right. I let myself mourn the son I thought I raised. Then I folded that mourning away and put on resolve like a spare coat. I rehearsed what I would say when I found civilization. Not a plea, not a justification, but a statement, a claim. I would not be invisible. I would not be dismissed as collateral in his life. Anger clarified into purpose. It taught me to be patient, to wait for leverage, to turn wounds into tools. My heart hammered, but the rhythm steadied me rather than breaking me. I thought about the house, about the land Claire and I had owned, about how I had always imagined passing it down with pride, not watching someone sell it while pretending I was stone-cold gone. That image flared hotter than rage, him smiling as he signed papers, the neighbors murmuring, he got what he wanted, not on my watch, not without repercussions. I would outlast him. I would expose him. I would make sure the world knew what he had done, not for petty revenge alone, but so the truth could sit on his chest like a weight he could not shrug off. There was fear, yes, the kind that whispers of failure and of the body's limits. But fear is a tool when you're honest with it. I cataloged my resources. A small savings account, an old friend from town who could listen, the stubbornness that had kept the house standing. That was enough to begin. I let myself break for a moment to feel the betrayal down to the soles of my feet. Then I sealed that feeling into a compartment labeled fuel. Every tear, every memory of being left on that dirt would feed what I was about to do. The more I thought of his face, when he believed me gone, the more certain I became that he had underestimated me. That smugness would be his undoing. My vows in that cold forest were private and precise. I promised the river I'd return to the town with my head high, not begging for crumbs, but collecting the consequences he had tried to buy. I promised myself I'd take back what was mine in ways he could not predict, through law, through rough exposure, through the slow erosion of his alliances. I would be deliberate, not vengeful for vengeance's sake. And underneath it all, I promised the smallest thing, that I would make him feel finally the weight of what he'd done. Not to kill his life, but to make him reckon with the man he'd become. I stood up, the tarp flapping like some tired flag, and I began to walk out of that clearing. My steps were unsteady, but my mind was a machine now, focused, cold, and resolute. As the trees thinned and the path tilted toward the road, I whispered the vow I'd carry from that day forward. Enough is enough. I will not be forgotten. I will make him regret the moment he chose a deed over his father. I came back to town with my face scrubbed and a story rehearsed. Got lost, found by a ranger. All's fine now? Nobody needed to know the nights I'd spent scavenging, the river that had saved me, or the cold that had sharpened me. Step one was to make them believe I was the same old man, quiet, beaten, unremarkable. If Ryan thought I was harmless, he would lower his guard. That deception would be my greatest tool. I booked a cheap room at Mrs. Gardner's motel, under a different name, and slept in daytime to avoid running into anyone who might know my habits. I watched Ryan's neighborhood from a distance, learning the rhythm of his comings and goings without being seen. Money was thin, but I had modest savings tucked away from years of odd jobs. I sold a few things quietly, a watch, a toolbox, things that wouldn't draw attention. Cash in hand, I started pulling threads. Patience, I reminded myself. Patience wins where rage burns out. Next, I called Mark, the lawyer who'd once given me free legal advice after a factory accident. I didn't tell him everything, I told him enough. I need to ensure the house doesn't leave the family, legally, quietly. He didn't ask me why I was gone. He only asked when he could see me. Loyalty runs on favors and shared history, and Mark owed me. I hired a private investigator with the name and number Mark recommended. I couldn't do the legwork myself, not yet. The investigator began by following Ryan's phone pings, watching his meetings with developers, and sending me short, coded reports late at night. He's cashing checks, the first note said. That line alone felt like a match struck. I took inventory of the paper trail. Deeds, bank transfers, signatures. I dug through old files in the attic until my fingers found the original title. I made photocopies and hid them in plain sight. The plan was to outpaper him legally, to build a record that would survive his lies. I also put small stakes in the ground, quiet conversations with neighbors who liked me. "You know, Ryan never seemed right about that property," I would say, casual as a man complaining about the weather. It was slow work, but effective. People listen when you plant a seed 3 times. I cultivated an ally I had not expected, Ryan's ex-wife's cousin, a woman named Liza, who still came by to buy preserves from my neighbor's stall. She had a soft spot for old folks and a distrust of men who moved too fast with money. I told her a portion of the truth, crafted carefully, and she surprised me by offering to keep an eye on Ryan's social circle. Her gossip became breadcrumbs I could follow. I learned to work in small, quiet steps. I didn't shout. I let the city think I was gone while I threaded a legal mousetrap. I changed phone numbers, used email aliases, and mailed documents to myself using different post offices so there would be no obvious trail back to me. I was creating plausible deniability, like a tailor stitches seams. There were moments when my plans felt childish, buying a prepaid phone like a schoolboy, or sitting in a diner to overhear stray conversations, yet every small detail mattered. I planted a rumor about an interested philanthropist whom I'd preserve historic properties. Suddenly, developers slowed their pace. I watched their impatience twist into irritation. Good. Anger that cannot act becomes its own trap. I also took care to mend my own image in town. I fixed Mrs. Hargreaves's mailbox for free, paid for a child's football with my leftover cash, and walked the dogs of neighbors who remembered me kindly. If Ryan thought I was weak, he would move recklessly. If he thought I had friends, he might hesitate. In the quiet hours, I sat with Mark and drew the outline of what we would need to expose him. Forged signatures, suspicious bank transfers, witnesses who could place him selling parcels of land before I was declared missing. Mark's eyes grew narrower as the puzzle became clearer. "You want to take him down clean," he said. "Smart." But I kept part of the plan folded like a secret photograph in my wallet. There are actions that cannot be put on paper, things you must carry in your chest until the right moment. I hinted at them to Mark as leverage, and he nodded without pressing. Lawyers understand leverage. They respect silence as much as we do. I also made sure my health would not betray me. A quick checkup, a discreet refill of medication, and the reassurance that I could stand long enough to see this through. Revenge is useless if the body gives out. Longevity is part of the strategy. At night, I practiced my poker face. I rehearsed the look I would wear when I walked back into Ryan's life. Calm, composed, the sort of tired that hides a steel core. I practiced the soft words that would unsettle him more than shouts. "I thought you were better than this." I planted legal notices with Mark in jurisdictions that would complicate any quick sale. Small legal knots that take time to untie. Time, I learned, can be a weapon. I let the developers think obstacles were bureaucratic. Behind the curtain, the obstacles were me. I arranged, through the investigator, for a few well-timed photographs. Ryan meeting with business partners, signing papers, laughing with a man who had a history of shady deals. Those photos would not be public yet, but when they surfaced at the right time, they would sting. There were times I wanted to rush the plan, to march into Ryan's house and accuse him with the napkin in my hand. Each time I caught myself and thought of Claire's gentle voice. Measure twice, cut once. So I measured. I set traps that looked like roads out for him, while they led to dead ends. I used secrecy like camouflage. I sent anonymous tips to a local journalist I'd once helped by fixing her flat tire. Journalists like a story that smells like betrayal and money. I gave her a few redacted documents to gnaw on. Curiosity would do the slow work for me, if I fed it right. Friends came and went. Some offered help I refused because they were too blunt, too eager to shout. This had to be surgical. I kept my circle small. Mark, the investigator, Liza, and the journalist with her pen poised. A quiet conspiracy of ordinary people with ordinary grudges and the patience to wait. Every night I reviewed the small victories, documents secured, rumors planted, the developer's cold call unanswered. I let each tick mark on my list raise a small, private smile. The plan was taking shape like a map, revealing itself one contour at a time. But I never revealed the endgame, even to my closest ally. I allowed only glimpses. "I'll need you ready in 2 weeks," I'd tell the investigator. "Hold those photos." To Mark I said, "Be ready to file by the first week of November." They complied with a look that said they understood better than I could explain. And for myself, I held the last piece like a card against my chest, quiet and terrible. When I walked past Ryan's house sometimes, I'd slow a beat and watch the way he moved, cataloging his arrogance, counting the steps he'd have to take when everything collapsed. Let him feel safe until the moment the floor gave way. So the town saw a tired, harmless old man. Ryan saw no threat. Only a few of us knew the slow arc I'd drawn between theft and reckoning. And in those secret hours, as I folded plans into plans, I kept asking that one question. How do you make a man who values money above family watch the price of his greed unfold? I didn't answer it out loud. Instead, I learned to wait, to let the web tighten where his impatience would struggle most. The patience itself was part of the plan, and as the days ticked by, the question hardened into the shape of a terrible promise. I played the long game, and the first move was the quietest one. I walked into Ryan's office the day he thought the papers would be signed, and let him taste the shock of seeing me alive. His face went the color of old paper. He stammered. I smiled like a man who keeps secrets in his pocket. But that public confrontation was only the opening act. Behind the scenes, the machine I'd built began to hum. Mark filed a challenge on the property transfer under a name no one at the signing expected. My name, reappearing in ink that proved I had never legally relinquished the title. The developer's lawyer sputtered. Ryan's hands shook as he tried to explain away signatures that didn't match. "You forged my signature," I told him in front of everyone, and the room went cold. He denied it, fingers white on the edge of the table. "You can't," he began. I cut him off. "You left me to a napkin and a laugh. You forged papers to sell my home." The murmurs rose. Mortification colored his face. The investigator fed us evidence like bones to a hound, photos of Ryan in late-night meetings, bank transfers timed suspiciously the day after I went missing, email threads where a developer pushed for an urgent close. We had receipts, timestamps, and witnesses who suddenly remembered phone calls asking if the property was available. The pattern was ugly and precise. Then came a twist I hadn't entirely planned. One of the developers, a man named Cole, had his own skeletons. The journalist I'd primed, quietly, carefully, dug and found that Cole had been fined the year before for shady land deals elsewhere. When Cole learned the press was sniffing around, he turned on Ryan like a cornered animal, trying to pin the entire scheme on him to save his own neck. He wrote an incriminating email that, by luck or design, found its way into our hands. I watched Ryan fray under the pressure. His calls to old friends went unanswered. His wife, who had once laughed at his plans, read the leaked exchange and left him a voicemail I'll never forget. "How could you, Ryan? How could you use your father like that?" I let her listen to the truth. She came by my house later with 2 suitcases and neither apology nor eye contact for him. That sound, suitcases closing, was sweeter than any victory I'd imagined. In court, the forged documents unraveled like cheap cloth. Mark presented the chain of custody for the title. The investigator testified to Ryan's deliberate meetings, and the journalist's exposé painted a portrait of greed that fit Ryan's actions exactly. The judge frowned as the evidence stacked up. Ryan's protest dissolved into thin, embarrassed noises. But I wanted more than paperwork. I wanted him exposed where it would hurt, in the community that had watched him grow. So I arranged for the neighborhood association meeting to be live-streamed. and I sat in the front row while Mark, with calm and precision, laid out the facts. Faces I'd known for decades watched their son, my son, defend the indefensible. There were gasps, clenched jaws, the soft shuffle of chairs. People who had once nodded at him now looked away. Public humiliation is a hard thing to swallow. He gagged on it. Ryan tried a counterattack. He hired a lawyer who threatened to sue for defamation. Predictable and useless. We turned his threats into evidence of guilt. Threatening lawsuits to silence people is what guilty men do when they're cornered. Each attempt he made to claw back his dignity only pushed him deeper into the mire. There was a moment I hadn't expected. His so-called friends, men he used as stepping stones, began quietly telling their own stories. "Oh, he did that to me too," one muttered to a reporter. The dominoes fell. It became clear he'd used the same cold calculation on more lives than mine. That revelation shifted the frame from a single bad decision to a pattern of character. Then came the bank. With Mark's help and a simple court order, the funds from the attempted sale were frozen. Ryan's accounts foundered, checks bounced, his creditors smelled trouble and backed away. The developers who'd planned to build on my land started looking nervously at alternative investments. Money, his god, was taken away in ones and zeros, but its absence felt like a roaring silence in his life. When the police interviews began, the investigators' careful notes translated into hard testimony. Timestamps, meetings, the napkin as a symbol of intent. Ryan's voice in those interviews was small, hoarse with pleading. "I didn't mean," he kept saying. "Intent doesn't excuse method. The law listened to evidence, not sorrow." The final twist was the most satisfying because it was simple and unavoidable. A neighbor who'd once admired Ryan published a video of him laughing in a bar, boasting about how easy it was to manipulate people for profit. He'd done it thinking no one would ever see. That video, paired with our legal files and the journalists' articles, made a portrait that could not be denied. The prosecutor smiled in a way that promised consequences. Charges were filed: fraud, forgery, conspiracy. The community that once called his name, yet church rarely called it again. On the day the judge read the sentence, Ryan looked like a man who had been hollowed out. He tried to catch my eye as they led him away, hope glinting like a shard. I met his gaze, and my face was a calm plateau. No triumphal shout escaped me, only the quiet fact that justice, slow and deliberate, had caught up with him. "You'll understand in time," I said, and it wasn't a threat so much as a measured truth. But punishment didn't end with legal verdicts. The developers pulled out, partners distanced themselves, and the whispers, loud enough to be shame, followed him like a cloud. His marriage dissolved entirely. His reputation crumbled into ash. I watched him rebuild nothing. That was punishment enough. And still, I left room for something I wasn't willing to trade away: mercy. At sentencing, I told the court how I'd raised him, the nights at hospital beds, the tiny human joys we once shared. I told the judge I didn't want to ruin him beyond repair, only to make sure he could not so easily ruin others again. The prosecutor lowered his papers, surprised by the steadiness of my voice. The judge nodded, meting out a sentence that balanced accountability with the chance for reflection. Afterward, people came to me with small, awkward apologies. Neighbors who'd doubted, friends who'd failed to see. Some offered help to get my house back in order, to plant flowers where the ground had been trodden. I accepted in small doses. Revenge had not made me cruel. It had made me whole again. In the quiet that followed, I often thought of Ryan alone in his small apartment, or in the visiting room of the prison, wherever he was, and felt a complex tangle of pity and steel. I had not killed him. I had not sought to destroy his life utterly. I had made sure he could not erase mine with a napkin and a laugh. The satisfaction was sharp and clean. The law had named what he'd done. The town had sowed in him for what he was, and the house, our house, remained ours. In the end, the revenge was not about cruelty. It was about restoring balance. I had taken back what was mine, and in doing so, taught him the cost of turning family into currency. When the dust settled, I stood on the porch of the house Claire and I built and watched the sunset paint the fields. I felt the old hurt, yes, but beneath it, a slow, steady peace. I had not simply avenged myself. I had shown a community, and my son, that some lines, once crossed, demand reckoning. The reckoning had come, and with it, a difficult, necessary silence. When the dust finally settled, I found myself sitting on the porch of the house Claire and I built all those years ago. The same porch where Ryan once sat as a little boy, swinging his legs, asking me how far the stars were. Now those stars seemed farther than ever. The town eventually stopped whispering about the scandal, though the air still carried its echo. People crossed the street to shake my hand again, their eyes soft with something between guilt and pity. I didn't need their pity. What I needed was silence, the kind that lets you think, breathe, and remember. The nights were the hardest. The chair across from me at the dinner table stayed empty, same as it had since Claire died. Only now I realized how much heavier an empty chair feels when your child, your flesh and blood, chooses not to sit in it. Sometimes I caught myself looking out toward the road, expecting Ryan's car to pull up. Maybe he'd step out, shoulders bent, eyes full of apology. But the road remained empty, swallowed by dusk. Still, I wasn't angry anymore. Revenge has a strange way of cleansing you, not of pain, but of confusion. For the first time in years, I understood exactly what I was feeling. He'd tried to erase me for money. I'd erased his lies for truth. That balance was all I needed. I spent my days fixing things around the house. The fence needed painting, the garden needed care. Those simple tasks grounded me. Every nail I hammered in was a reminder. I was still here. I had survived what my own son thought would destroy me. Neighbors' children started visiting sometimes, curious, bright-eyed kids asking for fishing lessons. I showed them the same tricks I once taught Ryan. Their laughter echoed through the trees. It didn't replace what I'd lost, but it reminded me life still had room for kindness. Months passed before I received a letter from Ryan. It was short, just a few lines scrawled in shaky handwriting. Dad, I don't expect forgiveness. I just hope someday you'll believe I regret it. I didn't write back, not yet, but I kept the letter. Tucked it into the old wooden box where I keep Claire's locket, the one I gave him, and he returned through shame. Maybe one day, when he's truly changed, I'll open that box again. I learned something in all of this. Revenge doesn't heal. It reveals. It shows you who you are when you've lost everything. And though it can never replace what's broken, it can give you back your reflection, the part of you that refused to stay a victim. Now, when the sun sets behind the forest where he once left me to die, I stand there watching, not with hatred, but with quiet strength. Because I lived, I endured. And that is a revenge deeper than any punishment the world could offer. If there's a moral to my story, it's this. Never underestimate the heart you tried to break. Love, when betrayed, may weep, but it also learns to fight. And in the end, the strongest revenge isn't destruction. It's survival with your soul still intact.